Those moments would always freak me out. It feels like somebody ripped you off from the controls and the giant mecha robot, whatever you're inside, is just moving on its own and you have no control over it anymore. You don't know how to get it back. That's like a fucking freaking experience. Hey all and every many, thanks for switching in to Housemates for Life, a podcast powered by Plurals for Plurals and everybody else who wants to hear more about the insanely awesome world of plurality. Here we talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful sides of sharing a body and mind. In today's episode, this long-awaited episode, we finally talk about dissociation, what dissociation means, and we will discuss a bit the scope of dissociation as a whole, cause like plurality, there is not one way to dissociate. We will talk from simple things like daydreaming, zoning out, plurality, amnesia, blurriness, identity confusion, brain fog, to more severe experiences like out-of-body experiences and depersonalisation. We are the voices of just a rather very insane system, aka Jarvis, and I'm your host Matt for this episode, and this episode is run by my headmate Will. If you enjoy listening to our podcast Housemates for Life, please tell a friend or more and leave a like, subscribe, rate, comment, and everything else you do to show your support and appreciation. Many thanks. And now, without further ado, let's get on with our show. Hi, this is Will talking right now, and I don't know how many times I said this before in episodes, but I always promise there will be at some point an episode on dissociation and or depersonalization, because that's a big part of plurality. I mean, not necessarily, but very commonly people who experience themselves as multiple or plural also have, at least to some degree, experience with dissociation. I mean, all people have experience with dissociation, so best to just dive right into it. What does dissociation actually mean? So the word itself basically means to lose connection, disconnect, or cut off, cutting off connection, basically. And in terms of psychology and mental health, we usually talk about being cut off mentally or emotionally or both, cut off from a situation, from your outer experience, inner experience, whatsoever. And whether you're plural or not, I think every human being knows what it feels like to be at least slightly dissociated. So I think the lightest form of dissociation would be a form of daydreaming or zoning out. People often bring the example of when you drive a car and you start driving somewhere, and on the way, or even if you walk somewhere, a familiar path, on the way, you start drifting off with your thoughts, maybe, and so you don't really experience the drive or the walk itself, but in the end, you get to your goal, hopefully. And it's very difficult to recall what happened actually in between exactly on the outside. Sometimes you recollect your daydream maybe, and sometimes there's no recollection at all, or very vague recollection of what happened from while you were moving from A to B. And this is, well, quote unquote, normal or healthy form of dissociation. I guess our brain uses this to save resources or something. And I think this is a good point to mention that we are not medical advisors, mental health professionals, or whatsoever. We're just babbling about our own experience and what we have, the little bit of knowledge that we have gathered about dissociation and related topics. So take everything we say with a grain of salt, please. And dissociation is also a great adaptation of the brain. It's a good coping mechanism for when you're faced with situations that induce extreme anxiety, or you're going through some traumatic experiences, etc. Then the ability to dissociate from that situation, decouple your emotions or thoughts from what's actually happening, either to you or around you, that's actually quite clever and helpful in the moment. Like with so many awesome things that our brain can do, like dissociating when you're bored or need to save resources, these kind of neat tricks can become maladaptive. And so when dissociation becomes regular day-to-day experience for you, or you dissociate when it's actually inappropriate or unnecessary, when it becomes your go-to strategy for any form of stress or adversary, or in any other way becomes an impairment for you in your daily functioning, then dissociation is problematic or maladaptive, or you might have a dissociative disorder, be it coupled to a dissociative identity disorder or other dissociative disorders. You don't have to be plural to experience extreme forms of dissociation. But yeah, these are just some this is just an overview on dissociation itself. If you want to learn more about it, we recommend Jamie Marich's book called Dissociation Made Simple, and reread it, or rather re-listened to the audiobook read by the authors themselves. So Jamie Marich identifies as a system and lives with dissociative disorder herself, and at the same time Jamie Marich is a clinical professional in the field of mental health. So this book makes a really great and reliable resource on the topic, because you can't really rely all the time on resources, especially when it's done about people. So in this case, it's not just about dissociation and people living with dissociation. There's actually a book by a person living with dissociation, and also a lot of quotes from other people having lived experience, which we appreciate a lot. So yeah, if you want to learn more about dissociation from a professional, people who actually know their shit, we recommend that one. And probably there are other cool resources out there. If you know any, type them in the comments, please. I don't know if this will come across once we have edited this, but I feel very confused right now. Not very confused, but a bit confused. And this morning, I was actually quite awake in the sense I had a tight grip on the steering wheel of our collective plural bus, and I actually felt like, oh yeah, I could record right now, feel really prepared and ready to record, but we had to go to work and everything. So, and now I'm like, I know Matt is around. He was there before, and we were like discussing this. Be like, okay, who's going to record this episode? Because I wanted to record this episode. I promised you, right? I would talk about dissociation, depersonalisation, but also at the same time, right now I feel very influenced, and sometimes I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about. Because, yeah, I'm also going to break a bit the script that we noted down a couple of days ago. It was a spontaneous decision, but I feel like this will make more sense like this. So what we plan is we will talk about dissociation and the different levels of dissociation that we personally identify in ourselves. So this whole thing is all based on our own personal experience, okay? So if you live with dissociation, or you're questioning whether you might live with dissociative disorders or something, this is just one version of how it can feel, look like, and it's just our own take on the topic. So we will go through all the different stages, from lighter forms of dissociation. I hate this word somehow. I like writing it, but I hate saying it. So from lighter forms of dissociation to more severe forms as we experience it. And we will tell you at each stage how it actually feels like for us, how we experience it, how it impacts our life, and what we can do about it or try to do about it. So hopefully you will learn one or few tricks here from us, or even better, hopefully you can teach us something in the comments. So the first and probably most straightforward form of dissociation, at least for plurals, would be switching identity itself. It is a form of dissociation because, well, from one moment to another, or depending on your switches, from 1 hour or from one day to another, you suddenly feel completely different, like a complete different person. You relate to everything inside and outside in a very different way, and so you basically, whoever was at front yesterday has left and is now dissociated from what is happening today. And if you live with amnesia, if you have amnesia barriers between your identities, well, that's an even more severe form of dissociation, because you basically lack their memory. Depending on your communication levels, can't recall what happened between these switches. So for us personally, switches is not a very dramatic form of dissociation in that sense, because our memory is more or less continuous, so we just pass on the memory cloud to the next fronter. It doesn't really change in that way. However, and I think Matt talked about this quite a lot so far, is emotional amnesia. So emotional amnesia would also be a form of dissociation where one headmate associates different emotions to a situation or to a memory than another. So Matt said this before, that he often feels very disconnected from the negative emotions that we collectively have, or that some of us have, mainly me. So he feels disconnected from that. He can't really associate those emotions with himself, so he feels dissociated, not to mistake with disassociated. But Matt is dissociated from certain emotions in our system, and so am I. So I feel very dissociated from his optimism. So I feel very disconnected from his beliefs, his core beliefs, his motivations, and whatever drives him. I don't know, it doesn't faze me. So yeah, that's like how we would describe our dissociation with regards to switching and emotional amnesia. And so sometimes this form of dissociation, where we disconnect from certain emotions, that can be actually really helpful and beneficial. So for Matt, sometimes it helps him if he can disconnect from whatever stress we experience collectively as a system. If he can disconnect from that, he can basically continue functioning, quote unquote, normal in overwhelming situations and in daily life, even though maybe in the background shit hits the fan and everything's going south. But obviously that's it's not really a long-term strategy, and we talked excessively about emotional amnesia in one of the previous episodes, so we will just link to that and continue with the next form of dissociation. So I mentioned this before, daydreaming. Daydreaming is a form of dissociation that probably everyone is in some form familiar with, and even daydreaming alone can become maladaptive and excessive, and it can disrupt your daily functioning. And for us, that actually happened way before we knew about our system. In 2017, the year was 2017. That was the first time we actually noticed that our levels and intensity of daydreaming is becoming a lot. So we used to be very imaginative as children, as child. I mean, we still are, but like at that time, it became disruptive. It started to be too much. We couldn't really focus on work. We couldn't fulfill our daily tasks. I mean, this sounds horrible, as if we're not functioning at all, but it wasn't that extreme. But we noticed a difference. We noticed, okay, something is off here. We start to drift off with our thoughts a lot. Sometimes not even daydreaming about something particular. Like as children, we would make up some stories in our head and like follow them or whatever, but it was just basically zoning out, right? And we concluded that because at that time we were very occupied with lots of things, with work, with volunteering outside in some sports organization stuff. So we didn't really have that much time for ourselves to just like sit down and just do nothing. So we concluded, our brain is reclaiming that do nothing time just like that by just zoning out. So that was our conclusion. So we tried to reduce stress, and I guess it worked. Another time where we noticed this excessive daydreaming or zoning out was during the pandemic and lockdown. That was really extreme, and it actually really started to worry us, because we were sometimes sitting for hours just around, being somewhere away with our mind, not sure where exactly, and then coming back and be like, okay, what happened? Why? Well, nothing happened. We were just sitting around. We even had inside jokes with our flatmate at that time, that who would just then suddenly come to us and be like, hey, are you stuck again? And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Sorry. So it felt disruptive. It felt like I'm wasting time just zoning out. But again, we blamed this on the exceptional circumstances, that it was the lockdown period. There was not much going on socially, and thought, well, maybe this is normal. It's a normal reaction to the situation. It will pass once this whole thing is over. And it did somehow a bit. So it got better. By now it's way better. But I would say it got better since we knew about our system. So once we learned about our system, we started to be more aware of ourselves. And we started to observe more what's going on in our mind, and what's our level of dissociation and stuff. So we got more aware of this happening. So we were better able to just snap out of it, right? The next form of dissociation we talked about also before. Is blurriness and identity confusion. And I have no idea how many times we referenced that episode. We talked about it in a previous episode, and one of the earliest episodes is about blurriness. And we made that intentionally because we knew we would need to talk about blurriness and identity confusion a lot, because that's That's what plurality is all about, just being confused about your identity and your state of mind. So if you haven't yet, check that out. We talked a lot about blurriness, how it affects us, how we try to cope with it. But yeah, to just summarize, this is basically a state in which there is not a clear fronter steering our collective system bus. So like right now I feel slightly blended with Matt, my headmate, and I feel very influenced, not as strongly as some other times, but I can feel I'm not alone. Which sounds creepy, but it's more confusing than creepy, actually. It's hard to stay focused on your thoughts. It's sometimes difficult to formulate an opinion on something because you can't really be sure if it's yours or if somebody is just infiltrating your opinion space. And yeah, it can be as pleasant as just vibing together, especially when you're on the same page on something, or it can become rather uncomfortable. You can feel, blurry, confused, and that can feel distressing sometimes. So it varies a lot how much that state actually affects your life. It also depends a lot on what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to just get by, just trying to get through a rough working day, it doesn't really matter who does the job. It just matters the job is done. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're single, you probably also don't ask yourself 24/7, who am I, what's my name, my age, whatever. And that's the same with us, at least, that we don't need to know 24/7 who's actually out at front. It would be great. It would be great if there was a big signpost everywhere telling me exactly who's fronting and who's not, and also to outside people. But yeah, that's not how it works. If that kind of blurriness or confusion becomes more extreme, or even sometimes, or actually also oftentimes when we are out alone, or if we clearly know who's out at front, we can feel this kind of fogginess, or I don't know if it's the same as what people call brain fog. It definitely fits the description that people often make. So it can be with or without identity confusion. Our brain just feels foggy and nebulous. It becomes more difficult to formulate thoughts and speak thoughts and bring them across. It's comparable to feeling tired, unfocused, exhausted. And in extreme cases, it can lead to executive dysfunction. So you try so hard to do anything with your brain, but the brain is just not moving, not one single step forwards, backwards, sidewards. It's just you feel so stuck in your brain and nothing is moving. And that, I would say, I find that state extremely uncomfortable, and it's way too uncomfortable for the frequency that we experience it. So this is a state we have every now and then, especially when times are stressful, when on a busy workday, for example. Afterwards, on the way back home, I'm just completely zoned out, trying to robotically find my way back to my home place. It's not nice at all. I mean, I don't want that in my daily life. It feels impairing my functioning. It feels like regularly somebody comes and just puts your head underwater, and try to cook while you're underwater, try to clean your house, try to even just watching a film is sometimes just impossible. It's just there are pictures in front of me, but I just can't process what is happening or what's being said. And imagine that in a conversation with someone that you actually like or want to like. You don't even get the chance to get to know people because, yeah, it's difficult. And how do we deal with that? Well, yeah, it's similar to the blurriness and identity confusion, is that, well, we basically don't cope well with it, or at least we don't have any solution for it. We can mitigate the effects, try our best to prevent it. So what helps is being more observant, becoming more aware of your identity states or your states of dissociation, by either journaling or taking notes. Take note of your state of mind and the spoons you have. Try to find labels for it and categorize these kind of states. So like we did, like we finally found different words for these different states because we have been observing these for quite a while now, and we always try to make sense of it, and now we have a fairly okay grasp of the different states. We sometimes compare it to weather, so there's weather happening in our head. Sometimes it's rainy, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's sunny or windy or whatever. And sometimes you just can't do anything about the weather, but you can, when it's raining, but you can pull out an umbrella, right? So it's easier if you have a good idea of what kind of weather you're facing, then you can better adjust and prepare for it. Doesn't mean that it works perfectly, but it's a start, right? And what helps in the moment, usually the best thing we can do is, well, first of all, Matt wants me to say this here. Keep calm and communicate. So dissociation is often a result of distress, anxiety, or something like that. So stressing about it usually worsens the state. So if you can keep calm about feeling dissociated, chances are good that it's going to pass sooner. And what helps us in particular is to communicate with each other in these situations, if we can. And this doesn't apply to every system. Not every system has a established communication or can just communicate in the head. But what we usually do is, starting talking to each other. Even sometimes, if necessary, writing via chat. It just helps. It helps grounding us in our identities, and it just helps a bit easing the situation, making the most out of the situation. Like if you can't function outside, at least you can somehow function somewhat inside, maybe. And if possible, taking a nap. I hate that because taking a nap is also something that feels empowering. That sounds like such a me thing to say, but I hate taking a break. I hate taking a nap. It feels like a waste of time. It isn't. It shouldn't be. But it's just what it feels like to me. It feels like, okay, I'm dissociated. I'm tired. I need to take a nap. This body is in need of rest, but I don't want to. And that feels like I'm not really in control. And I'm just a fucking human being, and I hate it. And if we can't take a nap or rest or whatever, then last option is basically muddle through. Well, it's like, you have to accept that's your state right now. You're dissociated. You're feeling like your brain is not functioning. But something needs your attention, or you need to get through it. For example, your body wants to eat, you need to cook, right? Or at least order food, takeaway or something. So you need to do something in that state, and you just gotta get through it and wait for it to pass. The next type of dissociation I want to talk about is probably something a lot of people have actually in mind when we talk about things like dissociation, which is an out-of-body experience. And disclaimer right away, for us, it's not really an out-of-body experience in the sense we don't feel like we are outside our body and looking at our body from the outside. It feels more like a shrink inside the body experience. Like it feels more like yourself, your consciousness, whatever, shrinks in your head, and you move kind of backwards, and you become smaller and smaller, and you basically, it's like in this film Inside Out, where they have this control panel, like in a spaceship, inside the head of the characters, and they control the human body from this control panel, and then it feels like this out-of-body experience. It feels like you shrink and you get further and further and further away from that control panel. So you can still see what's going on outside, but you can't reach the controls anymore. You're like literally disconnected. You have no control anymore about your actions or what you're saying. And that happened occasionally in the past. And those were moments where I often felt like, okay, I am not always the same person. Because so these kind of out-of-body experience would usually happen to me, Will. And it would feel like I'm talking to a person normally, and something happens or something happened before, and I would feel extremely uncomfortable, stressed, depressed, whatever. So I would just go into the back, away from the control panel, but the human that I'm inside, the human would just continue just talking normally, happily, excited, enjoyed, energetic, motivated, whatever. And I can observe that, I can see that, I can understand that on a rational level, but it feels like that's not me who's talking right now. Like, who is this person that is talking to my friend outside right now? Like, I feel so disconnected from that experience. And at the same time, I would recognize that behavior. I would recognize this joyful, happy, positive behavior coming from this human that I'm inside. And back then thinking, well, I'm in this human, so that's me, right? But if I'm here at the back looking at this other me talking outside, then who is me actually? So these kind of things have been around in my head for a while before we knew about plurality and systems. But yeah, those moments would always freak me out. It feels, yeah, as I said, it feels like somebody ripped you off from the controls, and the giant mecha robot, whatever you're inside, is just moving on its own, and you have no control over it anymore. You don't know how to get it back. That's like a fucking freaking experience. And nowadays we have them not so often anymore, only very, very rarely and occasionally, mainly because we know what's going on. We are aware of what that actually means. So we can actually, when that happens, we can actually talk it out, you know. And I notice that I'm dissociating to the back if I'm losing controls, and I realize, oh, Matt is taking over, then he just takes over. Like, we can talk it out, be like, he would be like talking to me saying, hey, I see you're struggling right now, should I take over or whatever? And then I just hand the controls over to him, so it doesn't feel like the controls are taking away from me. It feels more like he's taking. I give the controls over, and then it's like a normal switch. It just feels like he's occupying our collective consciousness, and I just go back and sleep or whatever. I'm not. If we would like try to explain that visually, the difference is that imagine we have this camera, the camera that records every point in time for our life. That's like our collective consciousness that records our memory from that perspective where the camera stands. Usually the camera is at the front. Usually the fronter is looking through that camera and recording collective memories through that camera. But in those out-of-body experiences, it feels like I'm still holding the camera, but I'm moving back with that camera. So I'm recording that event from my perspective, but somebody else is at front. But yeah, if we just switch, if we just hand over the camera, that doesn't happen. So the camera is handed over normally. So the camera stays at the front and the experience is recorded like from the front perspective, as it quote unquote should be, I guess. One kind of funny example of such an out-of-body experience after our discovery is we were meeting up with a friend, and actually Matt wanted to meet that friend, but on that day I was out at front and Matt was nowhere to be found. So I'm like, okay, well, whatever, then I will go to that meetup, I don't mind. So I went there, everything was fine. I was really happy that I could actually be alone out at front and be myself around that person. And then we went for dinner. We went for pizza. And as soon as I pulled the menu towards me and looked at all the options and the pictures of the pizza, right immediately Matt was shooting to the front. That's like one of his positive triggers is pizza and ice cream and everything, all of these good things. So he was shooting at the front and I was not prepared for that. So it felt like I was just kicked to the side with the camera still in my hand, kicked to the side, and he was suddenly starting talking to our friend through our body, right? He was talking to our friend, talking about the pizza, everything. And I was just literally next to him and looking at what's happening and being just confused about the situation and trying to sort it out, trying to actually give him the camera. I was trying to communicate to him, hey, we should actually switch here. This is weird. This is confusing. But yeah, it was difficult. It just ended up the rest of the day was just us being confused and blurry and yeah, kind of dissociated, I guess. Wasn't nice in the moment, but in hindsight it was kind of funny that Matt was basically throwing us into identity confusion because of pizza. The next form of dissociation is one that I personally I struggle with a lot, and it feels like I'm exceptionally the only one in our system who actually really struggles with this form of dissociation, which is called depersonalisation. I mean, you could argue that plurality in itself is a form of depersonalisation because you become a different identity or a different identity takes over the body, whatever. But this is something that feels like only I experience as an individual. And I feel in those moments, I feel actually strongly like I am me. I'm like 100% me, Will, but I feel depersonalized. And what does that feel like? Well, with all these kind of things about consciousness and mental states, it's so difficult to explain, but I will do my best. So being depersonalized feels like disconnecting, like literally disconnecting, not just disconnecting from the control panel, but disconnecting from your own identity in a way. So in an episode of Depersonalisation, I literally feel like a stranger to myself. I feel like a stranger in my own skin, in my own life. And not just because there are these other people who I share a life with, but like it feels like on a rational level, I understand who I am. I understand why I'm here. I understand why I'm in this room, for example, right now. I recognize this room as my own or as our space where we live every day, where we sleep. But in this episode of this depersonalization, my feeling is completely different. My feeling tells me this is not my room, this is not my body, this is not my life. I've been just put here suddenly with all these weird memories in my head of this person, and they are there, but they don't belong to me. And it's not delusional. It's not like that's how I believe it. It's not like I suddenly feel like, oh shit, what I'm doing here, who am I, what's happening, what is this place? As I said, on a rational level, I still know this should be my room, this should be my body, this should be my life. But my feeling tells me it's not. I don't belong here, I'm wrong here. And I'm not saying that in a low self-esteem-ish way. It's just a really strong feeling of this is not right. And so my rational beliefs and my emotional beliefs are completely opposite and disconnected from each other. And it's usually triggered by if I think way too hard about my past memories and connections in life I have, like connections with people in my life, connections with places that I've been to or that I am right now, connections to life choices, connections to my job and ideals, beliefs, and whatsoever. So if I think about all these things too much, especially because all of these things happening in the past aren't 100% choices of my own self, that often triggers that feeling of this is not my life, because it literally is not just my own life. And if I think too hard about that fact and think too hard about the fact that this will never be just my own life, then that can easily trigger this kind of episode of depersonalization where I feel like my past doesn't belong to me, my future doesn't belong to me, my life, my present doesn't belong to me. And it feels way more severe than feeling blurry or foggy. When I'm blurry or when we are blurry and foggy, it still feels like, yeah, this is a part of my life, unfortunately. But when in this kind of depersonalization episodes, it feels it doesn't just feel uncomfortable. I'm just literally not emotionally available. I'm literally not functioning in that moment. I may be functioning on a rational level. I may still be able to fulfill day-to-day tasks, and I might even be able to hold a simple, normal conversation with people, but on the inside I will be gone. I will be in my own weird space that I can't even define, because it feels like I'm so far away from everything. Like, yeah, being far away, that's a good way to describe it. It feels like I'm shouting from a building far away. And the more I try to reconnect, the further I actually get away. I don't know, I can't describe this. Maybe we'll record an episode once I'm there in an episode. I don't know. But yeah, I also have done. Sometimes these episodes are very short, very intense and short, but usually calming down, reminding myself this is just depersonalization and it's not my usual state and blah blah blah. So sometimes they are short and over quickly, but sometimes they drag on. And then it also doesn't feel so... I don't notice even at first that this is what's happening. It's just like sneaking into everyday life and everyday feelings, and then there's the thing that we switch. So sometimes then Matt takes over the front and everything seems fine and normal, but then I come back and at some point I realize I think the past few weeks I've been just being depersonalized, I don't know. And I then get the really strong and sudden urge to distance myself and isolate myself. I want to cut off all contacts that we have. Because, yeah, just imagine this. There are like all these people in your life and suddenly they're all strangers to you. Suddenly it literally feels like you are just suddenly put into somebody else's life, and that person has a lot of connections with other people, and these people supposedly know you, but you don't know them, and you know they don't know you, or you feel like they don't know you and you don't know them. And that feeling is so strong that if you try to have that connection that should be there, but it's not there in the moment, it just feels extremely, extremely uncomfortable. I can hide it so well, but it's so uncomfortable for me personally that, yeah, I just have this really strong urge to just get rid of all these strangers and just be alone. It feels it's almost disgusting. It's disgusting me. It brings up a feeling of disgust. Like, maybe that's me being super introverted, but it's almost like you're in a crowded place and everybody wants to touch you suddenly. It's like, it's disgusting. It feels disgusting to me, personally. And in hindsight, this happened long before we knew about our system. I remember there were quite often times in our life where suddenly I would just break off contact from a group of friends, or at least have the strong urge to distance myself from close friends that I used to hang out with every day at school or something, and suddenly I just want to get away. I just don't want to be around them because I suddenly have this strong feeling that they are strangers to me. And often that happened from one day to another. Maybe it was because of a switch in our system, but I can't know for sure. But to me, it feels exactly like I feel today. Sometimes these episodes of depersonalization, that from one day to another, I feel like everybody around me is a stranger. And even though I know this feeling is not real, but it's still a reality for me personally, right? And back then, I just misinterpreted that as I have an avoidant personality or some attachment issue whatsoever. Maybe I do, but yeah, hearing about dissociation and depersonalization, it feels so much more fitting or descriptive of what it is that I'm actually experiencing. Now, how do I deal with that, or how do we deal with that? Well, with all these things, not really, we don't. But so what I notice is that so when we talk about dissociation, people often talk about grounding techniques as a way to cope with dissociation, which I get why that is, but somehow it just doesn't really work that well for us. At least grounding methods that are related to body and sensory inputs. So usually or very often, grounding is used in situations of panic attacks or flashbacks where your mind wanders to a different time of your life and you try to come back to the present moment. So you would focus on your bodily, physical senses, like name 5 things you see and name 4 things you hear and taste and feel and touch and whatsoever. We tried that, but it doesn't really help. And I think I know why that is. It's because that our dissociation, or at least my depersonalization, is not really of a physical response reaction or something. It's more, it got to do a lot more with emotions. So oftentimes in this state of depersonalization, I actually feel like I'm very, very, very much in the present moment. It feels like I'm just hyper aware of my surroundings. It feels like when you watch a film, and usually when you watch a film, you are emotionally engaged, you're immersed in the story, you follow the characters through whatever they're going through. But every so often you notice yourself, especially when you are involved in filmmaking and stuff, you notice that you overanalyze what's happening in the film. So you realize, oh, that camera angle, that was well put. Or you notice a mistake. Maybe you're like, the lighting here doesn't fit, it feels unrealistic. Or you notice that looked very much like a stunt double or a CGI, whatever. And maybe you start analyzing what's happening in the film from a technical point of view. So you're basically hyper aware that you're watching a film. It's not real what you're seeing in front of you. And that's a lot how depersonalization feels for me, is like I am hyper aware of myself, the situation, the people around me, but I'm not immersed in what's happening. I'm not emotionally connected. I'm really not present emotionally. I'm present technically, but not emotionally. And so for me, grounding is more like I need to, instead of physical grounding, I actually need emotional immersion or emotional distraction. So what I feel like helps me better is distracting myself from that state. So doing things that I usually like to do, things that I usually like to immerse myself into, which is hard to do because when you're emotionally disconnected, your motivation to do anything just goes to zero. But yeah, having had mates that are very encouraging and knowing that this is a thing and this is actually usually working for me helps me to give me that initial push to be like, okay, I have to do this now to end the state. So I will do this. And yeah, like positive triggers. For example, positive triggers that would help, for example, Matt coming out more to the front and makes it easier to communicate. Positive triggers for myself, things that make me feel me, to like, yeah, to just immerse myself back emotionally into the present moment and not just being hyper aware of my surroundings, but like actually being present emotionally. That's something that I guess helps me in those situations. And finally, there are a lot of other states of dissociation, some of which we have experienced, some of which we don't think we have experienced yet, maybe never will experience, which I will just briefly talk over these few things. So one thing is taking blurriness and identity confusion to the extreme, is when it happens rarely, and usually it happens when we are very exhausted, is that our identity just dissolves. It's not just we are confused who is fronting, it just feels like nobody's fronting. It's like empty. The house is empty. It's just nobody's there. And it's not that bad. It's similar to the identity confusion. It's like if we're not super exhausted physically or mentally, we can actually function in daily life. We're just a zombie doing whatever we do, our daily routines, and that works just fine. And it's only negatively impacting us afterwards when we're like, oh man, we were gone this whole day. And in these situations, it's also very hard to formulate an opinion, but yeah, it's not too uncomfortable or distressing or impairing our functioning, unless in social situations, of course. But yeah, all our states feel like they are not made for social interactions. At least that's how I see it. Another thing is similar to depersonalization. There's something called derealization, and I think we experience it at least once briefly, but generally we don't experience it. So we hear about people who do experience derealization, you know what I mean, who experience derealization more frequently. And it's basically, I guess there's also a bit of overlap between derealization and depersonalization, but it's like it's not just your own self or identity feels unreal or you're disconnected from yourself, but it's more like the outside world seems strange, unfamiliar, or dreamlike. Like it can happen that things seem distorted or just seem like the colors don't feel right or something like that. And it's not a delusion, it's not a hallucination, it's like rationally, your rational mind understands things are just like they are always, it just doesn't feel like it. And then there are other forms of dissociation, like flashbacks, I would say, is a form of dissociation because you disconnect from the present moment and you dive right back into a memory or something like that. Or anxiety spirals, it's kind of the opposite of flashbacks, I would say. It's like you imagine the future, the horrors of the future. So you're not in the present moment, you're disconnected from the present moment, and your mind is wandering into the future, spiraling along anxiety. And then there are things like meditation is also, in a way, a form of dissociation, where meditation can definitely trigger dissociative states of mind. It's like consciousness and identity and all these terms. Dissociation is so broad, and I don't know, will we humans ever fully understand the scope of our own minds? I doubt that will ever happen, but here we are trying to find common ground in words and meanings. So since I'm already here, I might as well just do the outro and let Matt record the intro later, which you will hear at the beginning of the episode, I guess. So yeah, that's it for this episode. This very much anticipated episode about dissociation. I talked about all the different states of dissociation that we personally experience as a plural system. There's certainly a lot more to it, a lot more different experiences out there. So if you're curious, have a look around. I try to describe what it feels like, and try to share a bit how we cope with it, or how we try to cope with dissociation, which we are still very, very, very far at the beginning of it all. Until we discovered our plural system, we didn't even know that the word dissociation is a thing. So yeah, lots of opportunities, lots of things to try and fail and try again and hopefully learn someday. And I think the key trick is acceptance, which is probably the most difficult thing. I feel like Matt is way better at this kind of summary, concise stuff. We'll just end this here now, and we have a question for the audience. So yeah, tell us in the comments, how do you experience dissociation? How does it impact your daily life? And yeah, we would be happy if you could share some of your tips and tricks how you cope with dissociation. Okay, and now I will just hand over to Matt because I'm done. Bye-bye. This episode was brought to you by The Voices of Jarvis with me, Matt, here again. And this episode was brought to you by my handmaid Will. Can we add a little bit of thank you talking about this rather difficult topic today? And if you enjoyed this episode and think it brought a little bit of value to life, please tell a friend or more. Leave a like, subscribe, rate, comment, and everything else you do to show your support and appreciation, because this will help others find this episode as well. Many thanks. And as I always like to say, let your personality shine brighter than your eyes and your confidence shout louder than your voice. Until next time with Housemates for Life. And in the end, what you all have been waiting for, have some outtakes for your chuckle muscle. Let's go. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, what? Why is this not loud? Why do I have to scream? This is awful. I want to just talk to my voice level. Is it so quiet compared to screaming Matt? Yeah, and here you can cut in with like so many other cool things of the brain, blah blah. So I don't know how we started talking about the I'm confused.